There is a particular kind of quiet that belongs to the harvest season, not the quiet of winter, when the fields lie fallow and the world draws inward. This is a different quiet, the quiet of work completed, of grain gathered, of a landscape that has given what it has to give, and now rests in the warm aftermath of its own abundance. The mornings are clear, the evenings are long and golden. The air carries the smell of dried grain and dust, and the particular sweetness of a season that is full. This is a peaceful story from the ancient scriptures, set aside for the quiet hours of night. Let it carry you gently toward rest. The story of Ruth begins in another season and in another place. It begins in Bethlehem, a small town in the hill country of Judah, in the days when the judges ruled in Israel. Bethlehem, a name that means house of bread, the small irony of a place so named sitting in the middle of a famine. Because that is what the ancient account tells us. There was a famine in the land. Famine in an agricultural world is not the background condition of life. It is the interruption of it. The rhythms of sowing and harvest, of rain in its season and fruit in its time, are what life is built around. When those rhythms fail, when the rain does not come, or comes at the wrong time, or when the harvest is blighted, the fabric of ordinary life is disrupted in ways that touch everything. A man named Elimelech decided to leave. He took his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they left Bethlehem and went to live in Moab. Moab, the territory across the Jordan, east of the Dead Sea, was a different country, a different culture, a land outside the covenant community of Israel. But it had food, or at least the prospect of food, when Bethlehem did not. They went as sojourners, the ancient word for people who live in a place that is not their homeland, who are guests in a land that is not their own, who exist on the hospitality and sufferance of the people around them, rather than in the full security of their own inheritance. They went to sojourn, and they stayed. Time passed in Moab, the way time does in the middle of a life, not marked by great events, but accumulating quietly in the texture of the days. Elimelech died. The ancient account notes this plainly, without elaboration, just the fact, and then the fact of what remained. Naomi, left with her 2 sons. The 2 sons married Moabite women. Their names were Orpah and Ruth, and they lived there in Moab for about 10 years. 10 years, a decade of life in a foreign country. Long enough to put down roots of a kind, to make friends, to learn the rhythms of a place, to begin to feel something like home in a landscape that was not the home you started from. The sons had wives. Naomi had daughters-in-law. The family continued. And then the 2 sons also died, Mahlon and Chilion, both of them. The ancient account gives no cause, no explanation, no details, simply the fact of the loss, landing with the quiet weight of the unavoidable. Naomi was left, no husband, no sons, in a foreign land, without the men who had been the practical and legal support of her household in the ancient world. She was an Israelite woman, aging in Moab, with 2 daughters-in-law from Moab who were now also widows. The situation in the economy of the ancient world was as precarious as it sounds. Women without male family members, without a husband, without sons, without a father's household to return to, had very few formal protections. The structures of the ancient Near Eastern world were organized around the household unit, with its patriarch, and a woman outside that structure occupied a vulnerable position. Naomi knew this. She had been living it. Then Naomi heard something. Word came to her in Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food, that the famine in Judah was over, that Bethlehem had bread again. The house of bread had recovered its name, and something in Naomi turned. She decided to go back, to leave Moab and return to Judah, to the land of her people, to the place she had left a decade ago with her husband and her sons. She set out from Moab, and her 2 daughters-in-law went with her, walking with her on the road that led back toward the land of Judah. But as they walked, Naomi stopped. She turned to Orpah and Ruth and said, Go back to your mother's houses. You have been faithful to your husbands and to me. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to the dead and to me. May he grant you each rest in the house of a new husband. She kissed them, and they wept, all 3 of them together on the road. The weeping of the 3 women on the road to Judah is one of the quiet and human moments that makes the book of Ruth feel true in a way that more dramatic stories sometimes do not. 3 women who have lost men they loved. 3 women in the particular grief of widowhood, which in the ancient world was not only personal grief, but structural vulnerability. 3 women who had been a household together and who were now standing at a fork in the road, uncertain. Orpah and Ruth both said at first that they would go on with Naomi. They would return with her to her people. But Naomi pressed them again. Go back, she said. What could she offer them? She was too old to have more sons. Even if she remarried tonight and bore sons, would Orpah and Ruth wait for them to grow up? Go back. The hand of the Lord has gone out against me, and there is nothing I can give you. It is a speech of extraordinary honesty, not self-pity exactly, more like a clear-eyed accounting of what was true. She was older, she was bereft, she was going back to a life that held more uncertainty than promise. She was releasing her daughters-in-law from any obligation to her, naming plainly that she could not provide what they needed, encouraging them toward lives that might still hold the possibility of rest and security. Orpah kissed Naomi and turned back toward Moab. The ancient account does not condemn her for this. It was the reasonable choice. It was what Naomi herself had counseled. Ruth did not turn back. When Orpah turned back, Naomi looked at Ruth. Go back, she said. Your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Go with her. And Ruth answered with words that have been carried across 3,000 years of telling, that have been spoken at bedsides and at weddings and in times of parting, that have become one of the most recognized passages in all the ancient scriptures. She said, Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Let these words rest gently in the mind. They do not need to be pressed or analyzed tonight. They simply say what they say. A woman making a commitment, freely and fully, in the face of every practical reason not to. Not a commitment made in the excitement of a good moment, but in the full light of difficulty. Ruth knew what she was walking toward. A foreign land, an aging mother-in-law, an uncertain future. She chose it anyway. She chose Naomi, and Naomi, seeing that Ruth was set on going with her, said nothing more. She stopped urging her. The 2 of them went on together. The road from Moab to Bethlehem crossed the Jordan Valley and climbed into the hill country of Judah. The landscape changes as you climb into the Judean hills. The flat heat of the Jordan Valley gives way to the cooler air of the highlands. Limestone ridges run north and south, and between them the valleys hold their small fields of grain. The olive trees are old here, gnarled and silver-leaved, rooted in the rocky soil with the patience of things that have been in one place for a very long time. Terraced hillsides step up from the valley floors, each terrace held in place by carefully laid stone walls, the accumulated work of many generations. Bethlehem sits on a ridge, a small town looking out over the valley below. In the time of Ruth, it was a modest place, a community of farmers and shepherds, its people connected to one another by the long familiarity of shared land and shared work. When two strangers arrived, they were noticed. When Naomi and Ruth came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred. The women of the town said, "Is this Naomi?" And Naomi answered them, in the grief and honesty that she had been carrying since Moab. "Do not call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Naomi's grief is worth holding gently, without rushing past it. She had left Bethlehem full, with a husband, with sons, with the ordinary richness of a household intact. She was returning empty of all of that. The people she had left with were gone. The years in Moab had taken them, and she was back, older, bereft, with a Moabite daughter-in-law and no clear understanding of what the future held. Her renaming of herself from Naomi, which means pleasant, to Mara, which means bitter, is not a collapse of faith. It is honest grief, the kind that does not paper over the reality of loss with premature comfort. She is not saying that God does not exist or that the covenant is broken. She is saying, "I have suffered greatly and I feel it, and I am naming what is true." The ancient scriptures hold many such moments of honest grief. The Psalms of lament, the cries of the prophets, the weeping at Bochim. Grief that names itself plainly is grief that can, in time, be carried. Naomi did not pretend to be other than she was. The women of Bethlehem received her back, and Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. The barley harvest is a specific time. In the land of Israel, barley is the first of the grain crops to ripen, coming to harvest in the spring earlier than wheat, the beginning of the grain season, rather than its fullness. The fields would have been ripe and ready, the workers out in the early morning, the air carrying the dry smell of grain stalks and the particular dusty warmth of a harvest day. Into this landscape, Ruth went to glean. Gleaning was a practice embedded in the ancient Israelite legal tradition, a provision made specifically for the poor and for strangers and foreigners living among the people. When a harvest was gathered, the harvesters were instructed not to reap all the way to the edges of the field, not to go back over what had been missed, not to gather every fallen stalk. What was left at the edges, what was dropped in the gathering, this was to be left for the poor and the stranger. The practice had a name and a recognized form. Gleaners, the people who had nothing of their own to harvest, were entitled to walk through the fields after the harvesters and gather what remained. It was not charity in the sense of a gift given at the giver's discretion. It was a structured provision built into the fabric of the community's economic life, an acknowledgement that the harvest belongs in part to those who have no harvest of their own. Ruth, as a poor woman in a foreign land, had the legal right to glean, she went and exercised that right. She came to a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. And as it happened, or as the story presents it, with the quiet sense of a providence working in ordinary events, the field she came to belonged to a man named Boaz. Boaz was a man of standing in Bethlehem, wealthy, respected, a landowner, and he was also a relative of Naomi's, connected to the family of Elimelech, Naomi's dead husband, through the ties of kinship that organized Israelite society. Boaz arrived at his field from Bethlehem, and he greeted his harvesters in the way of a man who maintains good relationship with the people who work for him. He asked his foreman, "Whose young woman is this?" And the foreman told him, "The Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from Moab. She asked to glean among the sheaves after the harvesters, and she has been here since morning, except for a short rest in the shelter." Boaz looked at her, and then he went to Ruth directly. "Listen," Boaz said to Ruth, "do not go to glean in another field, or leave this one. Stay close to my young women. I have ordered the young men not to touch you, and when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Ruth bowed low to the ground, her face turned down. "Why?" she asked. "Have you found favor with me, a foreigner?" Boaz answered her. He said, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and may a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Under whose wings you have come to take refuge." The image is the same image used elsewhere in the ancient scriptures. The image of the bird sheltering its young beneath its wings, the warmth and safety of that enclosure. Ruth had left her own people and her own land and had come to shelter under the covenant of the God of Israel. Boaz named this, acknowledged it, and asked that she be recompensed for it. It was a generous recognition, and it was not the end of his generosity. At mealtime, Boaz told Ruth, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your piece in the wine." She sat beside the reapers, and he passed roasted grain to her, and she ate until she was satisfied and had some left over. After she rose to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not rebuke her. And deliberately pull out some handfuls from the bundles and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. Deliberately pull out handfuls and leave them. Go beyond the minimum of what the gleaning custom required, not just the edges of the field and the accidentally dropped stalks, extra grain, intentionally left." Boaz knew who she was. He knew her story, that she had been told to him. He knew her loyalty to Naomi, and he arranged quietly and without making a show of it, for her to glean more than the law required, more than any ordinary gleaner would find. Ruth gleaned in the field all day, and when she beat out what she had gathered in the evening, it was about an ephah of barley, a substantial amount, far more than a gleaner might ordinarily expect. She carried it back to Bethlehem and brought it to Naomi. When Naomi saw how much Ruth had gathered, she asked, "Where did you glean today? Where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." And Ruth told her, "The man's name in whose field I work today is Boaz." Naomi was still, and then she said, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." She said, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." That word, redeemer, in Hebrew Goel, carries specific weight in the ancient legal system of Israel. A goel was a near kinsman who had the right and the responsibility to act on behalf of a family member in need, to redeem property that had been sold in poverty, to marry the widow of a relative and raise up children in that relative's name, a practice called levirate marriage, which ensured the continuation of the family line and the protection of the widow, to stand in as the nearest available family support for someone who had lost the normal supports of family life. Naomi recognized in the name Boaz not just a wealthy landowner who had been kind to her daughter-in-law. She recognized a goel, someone connected to her by kinship, someone in whom the ancient structures of protection and provision might apply. Something shifted in Naomi's understanding of what was possible. She told Ruth, "Stay in his field. Do not go to another field. Stay close to his young women." And Ruth did. She gleaned in the field of Boaz through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, the whole span of the grain season, from the beginning of barley to the completion of wheat, weeks of daily work in the same field, returning each evening to Naomi. The two women lived together through those weeks. The days had a rhythm, Ruth going out in the morning, gleaning through the long hours of the harvest day, returning in the evening with what she had gathered. Naomi at home receiving Ruth, eating from what Ruth brought, carrying within her the quiet weight of her grief and the beginning, perhaps, of something that was not quite hope yet, but was adjacent to it. The harvest went on. The weeks passed, and at the end of it, when the harvest was complete and the threshing floor was full, Naomi spoke. Naomi said to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" Rest, the word that runs through the ancient accounts as a description of what the covenant promises and what a human life needs. Rest, security, a settled place in the world, the condition of being provided for and protected and no longer vulnerable. Naomi had thought about Boaz. She had thought about what she knew of him and what she knew of the custom of the goel and what the situation between Ruth and Boaz might mean if it were brought into formal clarity. She gave Ruth instructions. On this night, she said, Boaz would be at the threshing floor, the open hilltop space where the grain was winnowed, where the night breeze carried away the chaff from the grain, where the harvest workers would eat and celebrate at the completion of the season's work. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known until he has finished eating and drinking. And when he lies down, note the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. Ruth answered simply, "All that you say, I will do." The threshing floor scene in the book of Ruth has been interpreted in many ways across the centuries of reading and commentary. We will hold it tonight in the way the ancient text holds it, not pressing its ambiguities, but resting in its essential shape. Ruth went to the threshing floor. She did what Naomi had said. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, and he lay down at the edge of the heap of grain, she came quietly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, Boaz was startled and turned over, and there was a woman at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. She answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The phrase she uses, "spread your wings over your servant," is the same image Boaz had used when he blessed her at the field, "under whose wings you have come to take refuge." She is returning his words to him, asking him to become the embodiment of the refuge he had invoked on her behalf. to be not just the one who prays for her protection, but the one who provides it. Boaz answered Ruth with words that carry a quality of deep regard. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." A worthy woman. In the Hebrew, Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor or excellence or worth. The same phrase that appears in the closing poem of the book of Proverbs, describing the ideal of a capable and faithful woman. Boaz applied it to Ruth in the middle of the night on a threshing floor, after knowing her only through the weeks of her gleaning. He had seen what she was, not just her loyalty to Naomi, though that was part of it, but her character, the kind of person who makes choices out of loyalty and care rather than calculation, who comes to the threshing floor as a woman acting in the interest of her mother-in-law rather than purely in her own interest, who asks to be covered by the wings of the one who had already acknowledged her faithfulness. Boaz saw all of this, and he named it, but then he told her something that complicated the picture. "There is a Redeemer," he said, "who is nearer than I am, another kinsman, closer in the family line, who had a prior right and prior responsibility in this matter." The custom of the Goel was ordered by kinship proximity. The nearest kinsman had the first claim and the first obligation. "I will take up the matter in the morning," Boaz said. "If he will redeem you, good. But if he is not willing, then I will redeem you, as the Lord lives." He told her to lie down until morning, and in the morning he sent her back to Naomi, filling her cloak with 6 measures of barley, a substantial gift sent with her with the words, "You must not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed." Empty-handed. The same word Naomi had used of herself on her return to Bethlehem. "I came back empty." Boaz was intentionally reversing that emptiness. He was sending Ruth back to Naomi with something, as a signal that something was in motion, that the situation was not without its possibilities. Ruth came back to Naomi in the early morning, and Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Ruth told her everything, and Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. The man will not rest until he has settled the matter today." The city gate in the ancient world was not simply a functional entrance and exit. It was the place of public life, where transactions were conducted, where disputes were settled, where elders sat and witnessed and ratified the significant events of community life. To conduct important business at the city gate was to conduct it in the most public and legally formal way available. In the morning, Boaz went up to the gate of Bethlehem and sat down there. He was not waiting long before the nearer kinsman he had spoken of passed by. Boaz called to him, "Sit down here." And he turned aside and sat. Then Boaz gathered 10 men of the elders of the city and asked them to sit also. 10 witnesses seated at the gate, the formal quorum for a significant transaction. And Boaz laid the matter out. He told the nearer kinsman that Naomi was selling a piece of land that had belonged to Elimelech. As the closest kinsman, this man had the first right to buy it, to redeem it, to keep the land within the family. Boaz asked him directly, "Will you redeem it? If so, redeem it. If not, tell me, so that I know." The man said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz added the second part of the matter. "On the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi," he said, "you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. The fuller picture of what redemption meant in this case was now on the table. Not only the land, but the widow. The responsibility of the Goel to marry the widow and raise up children in the name of the dead man, so that the dead man's name would not be erased from his inheritance. The nearer kinsman changed his answer. "I cannot redeem it for myself," he said, "because I might impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." He removed his sandal and gave it to Boaz. This was the ancient custom for confirming a transfer, a public, visible act, witnessed by the elders at the gate. The sandal changed hands. The right of redemption transferred. Boaz then spoke to the elders and all the people who were gathered at the gate. "You are witnesses today," he said. "I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Mahlon and Chilion, and also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses today." The elders answered. They said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." These are generous words spoken in the public witness of the gate. The elders invoked the great ancestresses of Israel, Rachel and Leah, the mothers of the 12 tribes, as a blessing for Ruth. They connected what was happening at this gate, in this small town, to the long story of the people of Israel and its founding generations. What was being sealed at the gate of Bethlehem was not just a transaction. It was a continuation. One more link in the long chain of the covenant people. One more family formed within the story. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. The ancient account is spare in its description of the wedding itself. No elaborate detail of ceremony or celebration. Simply, he took her, and she was his wife. The transaction at the gate became the marriage. The formal public act preceded and constituted the personal union. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. The ancient text attributes the conception to the Lord, not in a miraculous sense, not in the way that Isaac's birth to elderly parents or Samuel's birth to Hannah were miraculous, but in the quieter sense that all of life, all fertility, all the coming into being of new persons is held within the larger care of the one who made life possible. The Lord gave her conception. A new life was given. The women of Bethlehem came to Naomi. They said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. More to you than 7 sons. 7 sons was the ancient expression of the fullest possible blessing for a man. A household so rich in male heirs that no fear of the future could touch it. And the women of Bethlehem said to Naomi, "Ruth, your daughter-in-law, is more to you than 7 sons. It is an extraordinary thing to say of a woman, more than the theoretical maximum of sons, more than any ordinary measure of family blessing." What Ruth had done, the journey she had taken, the words she had spoken on the road, the gleaning in the field, the faithfulness to Naomi across all the months and years of their common story. All of this had accumulated into something that the women of Bethlehem recognized and named with this extravagant comparison. Ruth, who had left her people and her land and her gods to come with a grieving woman to a foreign country, who had gleaned in the barley fields and brought home an ephah each evening, who had gone to the threshing floor at her mother-in-law's direction and spoken her request plainly and returned in the morning with a cloak full of barley. This Ruth was more than 7 sons. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. The women named him Obed. This is one of the quieter and more tender scenes in all of the ancient scriptures. Naomi, who had come back to Bethlehem calling herself Mara, bitter, who had said she had gone out full and returned empty, now sat with an infant on her lap, the child of her daughter-in-law and the kinsman redeemer, her grandchild in effect, though by the structures of the levitate custom, also in some sense the continuation of her own dead son's name. She held the child. The women who had stirred when Naomi came back to Bethlehem now gathered again. The same community of women who had asked, "Is this Naomi?" And they said, "A son has been born to Naomi. A son has been born to Naomi, not to Ruth, not to Boaz, though the child was theirs, to Naomi." Because what the child represented for Naomi was a restoration, not of what had been lost, not the return of Elimelech or Mahlon or Chilion. Those were gone, and Naomi's grief for them was real and did not simply disappear. But the emptiness she had named was no longer the whole truth of her situation. There was fullness again. There was a child on her lap. There was a future that had not seemed possible in the worst days of the Moabite years. Naomi held Obed, and perhaps the name Mara loosened its hold a little, and the original name, Naomi, pleasant, settled back into something closer to its meaning. The ancient account closes with a genealogy, a list of names running from Perez, the ancestor the elders at the gate had invoked in their blessing, through the generations to Boaz, and from Boaz through Obed, and from Obed to Jesse, and from Jesse to David. David, the great king of Israel, the shepherd boy who would become the beloved ruler of the people, whose name would be carried across the centuries, and whose family line the ancient scriptures would follow with particular attention into the very far future of the story. Obed, the son of Ruth and Boaz, was the grandfather of David. The story of Ruth, which begins in a famine in Bethlehem and moves to the plains of Moab and back again, which is the story of 3 women and their grief and their loyalty and their small daily acts of faithfulness. This story turns out to be part of the larger story in a way that none of the people in it could have known as they lived through it. Ruth, gleaning in the barley field. Naomi, sitting at home in the evening waiting for her daughter-in-law to return. Boaz, giving instructions to his foreman about the edges of the field and the handfuls to be left deliberately. These ordinary acts of ordinary people in an ordinary harvest season were part of a thread that ran forward into the history of the whole people. The genealogy that closes the book of Ruth is not typically read as one of its most beautiful passages. Lists of names do not carry the emotional resonance of the conversation on the road to Bethlehem, or Ruth's words of commitment, or the scene of Naomi holding the child. But the genealogy does something important. It places the story in the larger story. It says that what happened in Bethlehem during the time of the judges was not isolated. It was connected. It had implications that no one in the story could see while they were living it. The harvest season passed, and Obed grew, and Jesse was born, and David was born, and the great story of Israel continued. All of it tracing back, among other threads, to a Moabite woman who said, "Where you go, I will go." Let us slow down here before we move toward rest, and simply rest in what Ruth chose. She was a Moabite woman. She had married into an Israelite family that had come to her country as sojourners, and she had made a life with them for 10 years, and then her husband had died, and her father-in-law had died, and her brother-in-law had died, and the family she had married into was reduced to a widowed mother-in-law preparing to return to a foreign land. There was no practical reason for Ruth to go with Naomi. Every practical consideration pointed the other way. Orpah, who turned back, made the reasonable choice. Ruth knew this. She heard Naomi say it plainly and pressingly. She understood what it meant to leave her own country, her own people, her own religious tradition, her own language, and go to a place where she would be a foreigner. A Moabite woman in a country that had sometimes been at odds with Moab. She chose it anyway. She chose the person. She chose the relationship. She chose to accompany Naomi because Naomi was Naomi, the woman she had lived with and worked alongside and loved across the decade of her marriage. The theological statement that is embedded in her commitment, "Your God will be my God," flowed from the personal commitment rather than preceding it. She was not converting to a religion abstractly. She was accompanying a person, and in accompanying that person, she was also entering the community and the covenant that the person carried. The word that the ancient text uses for the quality of relationship, demonstrated by both Ruth and Boaz, is hesed. Hesed is one of the most significant words in the Hebrew scriptures and one of the most difficult to translate precisely. It is rendered in English as loving kindness, steadfast love, mercy, loyalty, or faithful love, none of which quite captures the full weight of the original. Hesed is the quality of relationship that goes beyond what is required, that extends care beyond the minimum, that persists when it would be entirely understandable to stop. Naomi invokes it when she releases her daughters-in-law. "May the Lord show you Hesed, as you have shown Hesed to the dead and to me." Boaz invokes it when he blesses Ruth. "You have made this last Hesed greater than the first." And when the women of Bethlehem bless the Lord at the end, they say that the Lord has not left Naomi without a redeemer, which is itself an act of divine Hesed, the faithfulness that does not forsake. Hesed runs through the book of Ruth, the way a thread of a particular color runs through a piece of cloth, not always visible, but always present, giving the whole fabric its particular quality. Let the mind come to rest for a while in the image of the harvest field, the barley field of Boaz, somewhere in the hill country near Bethlehem. The morning light coming in low and golden over the ridge, long shadows stretching across the stalks, the harvesters at work, men and women moving through the rows, gathering the grain with the practiced motion of people who have done this work every year of their lives. The sound of the work, the scrape of the sickle, the shuffling of feet through the cut grain, the murmur of voices, and Ruth moving through the field behind the harvesters, gleaning what was left, the dropped stalks, the edges, and then the extra handfuls that Boaz had quietly instructed his workers to leave, bending down to gather, moving forward, bending down again, the patient, repetitive work of gleaning. She did not know in that field what the weeks ahead held. She did not know about Boaz's kinship to Elimelech, or what that kinship might mean, or that there would be an evening on a threshing floor and a morning at the city gate, and a ceremony with the elders, and a wedding and a child. She simply worked. She gathered what was given. This is the texture of most of a life, not the great turning points, the words on the road to Bethlehem, the meeting at the gate, but the ordinary days. Ruth gleaning in the field. Ruth returning to Naomi each evening with what she had gathered. Ruth eating the roasted grain that Boaz passed her at midday. Ruth sleeping and waking and going out again. The great moments are embedded in the ordinary ones. They arise from them, are made possible by them. If Ruth had not been faithful in the gleaning, if she had not gone out each morning and worked through the long days, the story would have been different. The faithfulness of the great moment is made of the faithfulness of the ordinary moments that preceded it. The harvest field is not a dramatic setting. It is simply a place where work is done, and yet it is where the story turns. The town of Bethlehem during the harvest season was a community alive with the work of the grain. Threshing floors on the hilltops, open to the evening breeze that would separate the grain from the chaff. The smell of grain everywhere, the dry, dusty sweetness of barley and wheat, the warm mineral smell of the stone threshing floor, the cool evenings when the winnowing work was done and the grain was heaped in piles waiting to be measured and stored. The women grinding grain in the mornings, the stone hand mills turning with the slow rhythm of daily work, the grain becoming flour for the day's bread, the baking, the smell of bread in the small households of the town, the simple abundance of a harvest completed, the sense of provisions secured for the coming months. Into this community, Ruth had come as a foreigner, a Moabite, a stranger. By the end of the story, she was something else. She was the daughter-in-law of Naomi, who was native to the town. She was the wife of Boaz, a man of standing in Bethlehem. She was the mother of Obed, who lay on Naomi's lap while the women of the town gathered and celebrated. The foreigner had become, through the ordinary unfolding of an ordinary harvest season, part of the community, not by erasing what she had been. She is called Ruth the Moabite throughout the book, the designation traveling with her to the very end. But by the accumulation of loyal and faithful presence, she had become someone who belonged. The ancient Israelite tradition understood this kind of belonging as real and full. Ruth was not a second-class member of the community because of her Moabite origin. She was an Eshet Chayil, a woman of worth. She was the wife of Boaz, the mother of the grandfather of David. She was received into the community of the covenant by her own choice and her own faithfulness. The book of Ruth is sometimes described as a quiet protest against any narrow understanding of who belongs in the community of the covenant. Not loud, not polemical, quietly told, in the mode of a beautiful story that makes its point by showing rather than arguing. The point is Ruth herself, a Moabite woman, fully included, the grandmother of the king, the community that includes the stranger, that makes provision for the gleaner in the field, that receives the foreigner with the hesed, that does not distinguish between neighbor and outsider. This is the community, as the ancient story understood it should be. The book of Ruth is a short book, 4 chapters, a story that can be read in a single sitting or heard in a single evening. And yet it contains, in its brevity, a completeness that longer stories sometimes do not achieve. It begins in grief and ends in joy. It begins in emptiness, Naomi's emptiness, the word she chose, and ends in fullness. It begins with loss and ends with birth. It moves from the road between Moab and Bethlehem to the city gate of Bethlehem, to the harvest field, to the threshing floor, and back to the gate, and then to the household, where Naomi holds the child. The thread that connects all of it is Hesed, the faithful love that goes beyond what is required. Ruth's Hesed to Naomi, Boaz's Hesed to Ruth and Naomi, and underneath and through all of it, the divine Hesed that the characters in the story invoke again and again. The Lord repay you, the Lord bless him, the Lord has not forsaken you, the Lord gave her conception. The human Hesed and the divine Hesed are not separate in the book of Ruth. They mirror each other. The human characters enact what they understand the divine to be like: loyal, faithful, going beyond the minimum, leaving extra handfuls in the field, and the divine acts through the human actions, providing through Boaz's instructions to his workers, restoring through Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi, giving new life through what looks like ordinary fertility, Hesed all the way through, the thread of loyal love running from one end of the story to the other. 3,000 years of readers and listeners have found something in this story that they needed. In every era, people have come to this small book and found in it something that spoke to their particular situation. People in exile far from home, finding in Naomi's return something that sustained their own hope of return. People who had lost much, finding in Naomi's honesty about her grief permission to name their own. People who had been welcomed by strangers, finding in Boaz's instructions about the field a form of generosity to practice themselves. People who loved someone across every practical obstacle and cultural difference, finding in Ruth's words on the road a language for their own commitment. The story is small enough to enter fully, simple enough to carry, true enough to sustain weight, and the Hesed at its center is available in every era and every situation, where human beings are called to choose between the minimum and something more. Let the story settle now, the way grain settles in the sieve when the winnowing is done. The harvest field is quiet in the evening. The long day of work is over. The sheaves are gathered, and the gleaners have gone home, and the threshing floor will be busy tomorrow. But tonight it is still, the grain heaped in the cool air of the hilltop. The stars are coming out above the hill country of Judah, the same stars that were above the harvest field 3,000 years ago, when Ruth gleaned and Boaz watched, and the large providence of the story moved quietly through the ordinary events of the season. Naomi is in the house, with Obed on her lap. The child's weight is warm and real. His breathing is slow and even, the particular even breathing of an infant who has been fed and is content and has nothing to want right now. Naomi's hands hold him. The grief that called her Mara has not entirely gone. Grief like that does not simply dissolve, but there is something else now alongside it, the child, the new life, the fullness that was not there in Moab. She holds him, and the evening settles around them. Ruth is nearby. She has set down the day's gathered grain. She is home, not the home she was born into, not the home of her parents in Moab, but this home she has made by her choosing, this house in Bethlehem, that is now her house. She is where she said she would go. She is among the people she said would be her people. The words she spoke on the road from Moab have held. They were not easy words spoken in a good moment. They were words spoken in the full light of loss and uncertainty, and every practical reason to go back. And they have held through the barley harvest, and the wheat harvest, and the threshing floor, and the city gate, and the wedding, and the child. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. She is there. Let the breath slow now. Let the body rest where it is. The harvest is in. The grain is stored. The child is on Naomi's lap. The city gate witnessed what it needed to witness, and the elders spoke their blessing, and the nearer kinsman removed his sandal, and the matter was settled. Everything that needed to happen in this story has happened. And what happened was enough, more than enough. 7 sons worth, and then some. The faithful love, Hesed, that ran through this story does not belong only to its ancient characters. It is a quality of relationship that has been practiced wherever human beings have chosen to go beyond what was required, to leave extra handfuls in the field, to accompany the grieving person back to the difficult place, to name the foreigner a woman of worth. Tonight, whatever form of a Hesed has moved through your own day, the small acts of loyalty, the choosing of the person over the practical calculation, the extra handful left deliberately, let it rest. Let it be what it was. The grain is in. The child is held. The thread of faithful love persists. Be still. Sleep. Amen.